My Ignite talk is going to discuss the benefits of feeding birds in the winter. Research has shown that the birds that have been fed in the winter have healthier chicks in the following spring that are more likely to survive and leave the nest. The study this talk is based on was published in the Journal of Biology Letters in 2008. The researchers conducting the study found that the birds that were fed during the winter produced healthier chicks in the spring that had higher rates of fledging. So what exactly is fledging? It is when the chicks develop strong and big enough rings to be able to leave their nest successfully without falling. The sequence of development is that the egg hatches, the chick develops or grows bigger, and then it leaves the nest or it fledges. There is a widespread view that the wild birds should be looked after in the winter. However, as natural food supplies become more readily available in the spring, human feeding often stops, as people feel that the birds are able to look after themselves. Previous studies researching the effects of bird feeding were different in that they provided food year-round instead of only in the winter. They weren't focused on what happens after additional feeding stops the way it does in real life. Other studies were also smaller in scale. They tended to only focus on the period where provisioning was taking place, and they tended to only use one or two sites, directly feeding birds close to the nest rather than at a larger landscape scale. The current study is one of the few provisioning studies using a treatment control experiment conducted at a landscape scale. The treatment conditions were the sites that fed birds via bird feeders, and the controls were the sites without the bird feeders. The location of the study was in County Down, Northern Ireland. 10 woodland sites were selected. Half of them were randomly assigned to the control, and the other half were assigned to the sites with the bird feeders, or the fed sites. All of these sites were approximately 3.5 kilometers apart. This distance was to ensure that the birds at the control sites wouldn't fly and feed from the feeders in the fed sites. All of these sites were paired and according to woodland composition so that the forests were of similar size and consisted of the same vegetation. The location of the sites were also paired so that they'd have similar surrounding habitats and public access. Wire mesh bird feeders filled with 1 kilogram of peanuts were placed in the sites about 100 meters apart. The feeders had guards on them to start other animals such as squirrels from feeding from them. This ensured that the peanuts consumed actually was the birds. The birds that were caught at feeding at the feeders were abandoned by the researchers. They did this so that they could be tracked and the target species, the blue tits, were remaining in the area in the following spring. The supplementary food was provided at the fed sites all winter from November to March. An average of 66 kilograms of peanuts were consumed at each site during this period, and feeding stopped over 6 weeks before the first recorded egg-laying date. Nest boxes were provided at all sites and were in position 1 year prior to the start of the experiment. Breeding parameters were determined by regular box inspections every 2 to 3 days from April to June. Nest boxes. Because of the regular inspection of the nest, the researchers were able to determine how birds fledge successfully and how many died or didn't hatch at all. And just as a recap, fledging is when the birds are able to leave the nest successfully. The results of this study show that there were almost 1 extra chick per nest that fledged successfully in the fed sites compared to the unfed sites. This effect was significant. There were 20% more birds fledging in the fed conditions. So why does supplementary feeding during the winter benefit the chicks that are hatched in the following spring? It is speculated that the parents are healthier and therefore better able to care for their chicks. The average number of eggs laid didn't differ between groups, only the amount that survived did. It is speculated that the peanuts in the bird feeders provide the birds with additional nutrients that are essential to their well-being. These nutrients can then be passed on to the eggs, and after the chicks hatch, they can benefit from the extra nutrition and grow stronger. So all of this means that it is a good idea to encourage the use of bird feeders in the winter. Feeding birds in the winter results in the higher rates of chicks fledging. This effect is, of course, mediated by the amount of nourishment the birds receive. And this we're excited for the study that I was using.